Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're all here. I am going to share my screen with you. Can everyone see that?
Looking good.
Okay, good. Well, as Eric said, we're going to talk about strategic marketing. I'm going to give you a sort of a quick overview of some of the key elements here. I could talk for hours about each of these areas, but I'm going to spare you that for now. As we're able to meet together, we can talk more in depth about many of these areas. Just a little bit about my background. I worked in advertising agencies for many years. Was lucky to work at really interesting, innovative, creative agencies where we got to work with inspiring clients and worked all around the country, as Eric mentioned. I also was able to get involved with the internet and with digital very early on in the industry's history and helped start one of the first digital content companies that was out there. We were providing entertainment content through the internet in the early days. If you can imagine, it was quite an interesting prospect to be involved with. We eventually sold the company to Yahoo. And from that point on, I've really worked as a strategic consultant, helping different kinds of companies, whether they're startups or more established companies, develop their strategies for marketing under the umbrella of marketing, but it also includes product development, product launches, company launches, a whole range of issues that have to do with different kinds of businesses and the needs of those businesses. As you all know, startups have a lot of unique challenges, and you're all experiencing those challenges now. Because when you're in the startup phase, you have so many of these challenges, it's really important to put your marketing strategies in place because it makes everything you do easier. And when you can develop these smart, focused, disciplined strategies, it makes not only your communications much more powerful, but it makes your decision-making much more easy as you go through. And we'll talk about how that works in the next few slides. One of the main points that I would love for you all to take away with you is that strategic marketing is a constant in everything that you do as a company. And lots of times people say, well, you know, we're just trying to get the company together. We don't have time to think about marketing right now. That comes somewhere down the road. And the truth is that marketing is in every phase of your business and every aspect of the business from the time that you first decide that you're going to start a business. And every communication you have, every time you sit down with someone, have a cup of coffee, every email you send, certainly every funding request that you make has to do with marketing and strategic marketing. It even spills into a lot of other areas like who are you going to hire as you're starting up your business. You almost need a little mini marketing plan in your head, at least, every time you have a communication with somebody. So it's important to put those strategies in place early and build on them. And then eventually you get to the point where you can start to think about, well, how will I use social media, or what should my logo look like? Or, you know, a lot of the executional elements that you tend to think of as being part of marketing. So it's important to be really intentional in these key areas and to be as rigorous in how you approach strategic marketing as you are in other aspects of your business. And many of you are developing businesses that are very rigorous in the medical field and the scientific field. And if you can apply some of that mindset towards how you develop your marketing and the strategies that go into it, you'll have a much stronger program to build on as you go forward. Feel free to ask any questions along the way if any occur to you. So this is where the iceberg comes in. The topic of my discussion today is, why are we talking about icebergs if we're talking about marketing? Well, the reason is we're all really familiar with the term the tip of the iceberg. And the tip of the iceberg is what you see up on top. It's what everybody sees in the public. It's what you know and think about a company or a product or an organization when you first think about them. But like with the iceberg, there's a whole lot going on underneath the water that forms the foundation. And all of that can be sometimes even more important, and it has to be solid, and it has to hold your business in place just like it has to hold the iceberg in place. So what that really means is that the outside world sees that tip of the iceberg. They generally don't know everything that goes on underneath, but you need to do what's underneath in order to create the tip of the iceberg, what people see. And so when you think about the executional aspects of marketing that make up the tip, those are, it's your logo, it's your name, it's the look and the feel, the tone and the personality of what you project to the outside world. It's certainly how you put together your funding requests, any presentation, any kind of a pitch. All of those things on the left side that we tend to think of as marketing, presentation materials, websites, any kind of PR that you might have. These things all rest on the foundation of what you see on the right side of the screen. You have to put all of these strategic elements in place in order to support the executional elements that people see. And some of you may have a lot of this in place, or some of these areas thought through, or for some people, it may just be time to start thinking about these things and putting them in place so that you can build on them. I'd like to just touch on a few of them just for sort of conversation's sake. And there may come a time down the road where you want to talk more in depth about each one of them. But I'll just hit on some of the key points so that you can get an idea of what's really involved. So as I said, the strategic marketing can't come in after you start to really get far down the road with your business, because it does lay the foundation of your business. It helps define and create your story and lays the pathway for how you tell your story in the most powerful, compelling, and effective way. And some of us have already spoken a bit, and this is always a question that comes up. How should I say? What should I say? Who should I say it to? And what's the best way to get people to understand what I'm saying as telegraphically and powerfully as possible? And when you go through this process, you discover the true essence. What's the most important thing to communicate to a specific target audience about your company, about your business, about your products? And it helps you tell that story consistently. There's a reason why we hear politicians sort of repeat the same thing over and over and over again. It's because that's how people absorb information and how they get to really understand you and your business and how it works. So consistency can be very important. If some of you have been able to sit in on some of our Friday conversations, you've heard some of these phrases already. Joe Broschek talked about executive summaries, and how executive summaries are really a way to tell your story quickly and telegraphically. And really everything you do, your business plan, certainly your executive summary, every presentation and conversation is about telling your story in the most powerful way. Sonia talked last week about the people who are reading your submissions and how you want them to say, "You had me at hello," or "That's the wow, what's the wow?" Because you want to grab people and pull them in, not in a gimmicky way, but in an authentic way, And always think about, how am I going to do that? How am I going to get people to start to follow my story as soon as I say hello to them? Lots of times, and I've seen this in some of the submissions that have been put together for grants, the lead gets buried. It's like the most important part ends up for some reason on the second page or even farther into a document. So once again, you have to identify what's most important and put it up where it makes an impact. And then the other things that we talk about a lot is knowing your competition, which is absolutely critical. Knowing your market, knowing your customer, knowing your industry. POD, 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 that's a place I always start. Point of difference. What is it about you that makes you different, better, special, whatever it is you want to communicate? Really hard sometimes to articulate that, but critical to building your business. And in everything you do, to remember to tell your story, to tell it in an impactful, clear, concise way. So these are some of the elements that we use to do that. And I start with brand. The brand is not what your logo looks at. The brand is the blueprint and touchstone for your business. It's what you constantly move forward with and come back to as a touchstone. Are we on strategy? Are we really following the guidelines and standards that we set up for our business? And what's interesting about brand is it has to hold for all of your audiences, not just an end user. A lot of you are developing companies where you may have little or sometimes no interaction with an end user, but the brand has to be supportable for the people who bring the product to the end users and the end users themselves. So again, identifying different target audiences and how to have an impact. The brand, importantly, allows people to believe in you and to believe in your product. You can make a brand promise and you have to be able to support it. Reasons to believe in that promise. Brands keep you on strategy. Every time you make a decision, you have a brand to go back to and say, is that on strategy or is that off strategy? So it's critical there. And it just allows you to build your singular vision and your singular focus. So brand nerds like me have a saying that say, brand is not what you believe about your company. Brand is what other people are willing to believe about your company. Because many of us go out and say, well, I'm the best at this, and that's my brand. And if the support isn't there, and you're not allowing people to believe that, then it's not a brand. It's not something that people can believe in. Does anybody recognize the brand that's represented by our panda bears? They're specific
yes.
for Eric and Anita.
Oh.
This is a brand that I worked on a long time ago, if any of you are familiar with the band Kiss. And we started Kiss, you know, with these 4 guys from Brooklyn who didn't have much musical talent. But even today, they're recognizable. Thank you very much. I see the Kiss Army has joined us. You know, all these years later, they're still one of the top selling bands in the world. And they are pure brand. They don't have that much to back themselves up except for brand, which is
excuse me, did you say you helped start Kiss's brand, the band Kiss's?
The band
brand?
Kiss, yes.
You did?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
And as I always say, yes, all the stories you hear are true. And they're wild. We had some wild times. But the thing is that they had a vision, or the people around them had a vision, and they absolutely have stuck to it all of these years. So when you see something like this, you know it's Kiss. And that's what you want to do for your companies and for your products as well. You want to be recognizable as standing for something. Maybe not what Kiss stands for, but what you would like to stand for yourself. So I almost always start with a competitive review when I'm working with new companies. Yes, you have competition. There are very few founders who I've ever worked with who have not said to me at some point, I have no competition. Nobody does it as well as I do it. Nobody does it as cheap, or nobody does it, you know, as smart, or whatever they believe that they do. But the truth is everybody has competition, and it's not enough to say I don't have competition. You have to be able to prove what you do that's better than everybody else, or different than everybody else. So that robust, honest assessment of the competitive landscape allows you to make critical decisions. It allows you to know how to price your product. It allows you to, how to think about distribution, how to think about partnerships. Everything in your product development has to fall in line with the competitive landscape. And then how other companies are communicating to your target audiences, the branding, the messaging, what those executional activities are, how they market, what media they use, those sorts of things will have an impact on what you do also. And there are dozens of different attributes that need to be measured and constantly looked at and tracked. So it's important to start that early. And it's also important to think about not just direct competitors who are, you know, in your mindset in terms of who you think you're competing with, but to also look at indirect competitors that occupy a place in the user's mind. So you may not think that they're competitors, but your end users, your partners, your clients may think that they're competitors, and it's important to look at all of that.
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you recommend for us how to do sort of a competitive review, and then to, you know, constantly update that? How do you,
well,
what mechanisms you suggest?
I'm sorry, there are lots of tools that we use. You know, there are ways to set up different sorts of matrices where you sort of list out the things that you want to measure and companies that you want to measure it for. And then you start to build this picture of your entire industry and where you fit in that industry. And, you know, that's a good way to start to take a stab at it.
So just to add, apologies for the interruption, but
Sure.
As a part of our incubator, we do help coordinate access with the University of Arizona Libraries, which has institutional licenses from a lot of resources where you can kind of dig up some of the information that Susan is talking about. If you'd like a connection to the libraries and some of the collections that they have, reach out to Anita and we'll make sure to introduce you to Jason at the libraries.
Great. Because that sometimes is half the battle, just finding the information. So that's really helpful. Let me just give an example of an indirect competitor. And I'm going to use a consumer example because that's usually a little easier to sort of visualize. If you were introducing, say, a new vitamin water to the consumer public, you would initially think, well, let me go and look at all the other vitamin waters that are out there, and you should do that. But then if you take it a step farther, your consumer may say, I want a vitamin water, or I want a sparkling water, or I want plain water, or I want a soda, or I want, you know, some other kind of beverage, or I want some other kind of product that's going to make me feel healthy. So your direct competitors might be other vitamin waters, but all those other kinds of products may have a place in the consumer's mindset. So when you're thinking about your own business, and you know, many of you are going to have just a handful of potential direct competitors, but also direct clients. If you can widen out your vision of where that client needs to compete, then you'll start to get a full picture of the entire marketplace. So did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The point of difference, this is what it's all about. This is critical. Sometimes you hear it referred to as unique selling proposition or a unique value proposition. This is what makes you different, better, you know, however you want to define it. But it's how you uniquely fulfill the needs of your audience. What is that thing that's truly different? You're cheaper, you're better because you're higher quality, you're more fun, you're more reliable, whatever that thing is that you can occupy. It's important to identify and define what's true about you as a company, and identify and define what's true about your competition. And again, here, there's some tools that can make this, you know, an easy way to look at the whole competition. But when you can define yourself and define others, then you can find that place that you can occupy, that you can solely own and control. And I'm going to talk a little bit about emotional benefits because, you know, I've been told that sometimes engineers and people in scientific fields get very uncomfortable when I talk about emotional benefits, but just bear with me, it's very short. We know that people oftentimes talk rationally, but they act emotionally. And when you can find the emotional benefit, it's much more powerful and it's much more motivating. So for instance, if you're going to one of your clients and you want to sell your new system, your new way of doing things, they may ask you very rational questions. Well, how much does it cost? And how much money will it save me? And, you know, those things that you can measure on a rational basis. In the back of their mind, they may be thinking, how much work is it going to be for me? Yes, maybe I can save the company some money, but then maybe the company doesn't need me in this job anymore. And those are very emotional reactions that they might be having. If you can recognize that going in and try to understand what their objections might be on a under the surface basis, oftentimes you can develop a much more powerful and compelling kind of presentation that puts people's fears aside and lets them really focus on the benefits of what you're bringing to them. So important to keep those emotional benefits in mind as you're thinking about different sorts of presentations. Target audiences, of course, you all will have multiple target audiences. We traditionally think about targets in terms of demographics, which is one way to talk about them, but it's also sort of a one-dimensional way to talk about our targets. So we want to layer on psychographics as well. So that's more about how your target thinks and feels. And it gives greater dimension to the people that you're talking to so that you, again, have a better story to tell them. A couple examples of that. You may have a product for the business market, and you might initially define the people that you're talking to as, say, in this case, a male who is a business professional. That's kind of a flat way to think about your target. Whereas if you think about them in terms of a business professional who travels a lot of their time and needs something that's on the go and easy to use, it starts to develop how to talk to your target audience about what your offering is to them. Another example, I once did a project where we defined our target audience as a Whole Foods mom in a category that was almost always just talking to female aged 25 to 49, very flat. Now, if I say a Whole Foods mom, you probably get an immediate picture in your mind of who that person is. They may not be a mom, they may not be a female, they may not shop at Whole Foods, but you start to understand what that person is looking for and what their motivations are. Certainly with investors and with funding requests, I've been in angel meetings where somebody will come in and ask for $2 million when in fact the usual investment is around $20,000. That's always a disconnect. And I've had the opposite happen as well, where people will come into, say, a venture meeting and ask for a small sum of money. When in fact the venture is there looking to give out, you know, to make much more major investments. And so it's important in every audience that you have to understand what motivates them and to tailor your presentation accordingly. And you will tailor your presentations to different target audiences once you've defined all those target audiences, but you always have to come from the core of what's authentic about your company and your offering. So you may change the tone or the words to some extent, but you don't, it's not a wholesale change in how you approach different target audiences. And just a couple of the quick points. You know, messaging is really hard, but the powerful messaging and powerful communications flow out of this full understanding of your brand, your point of difference, your target audiences, and the competition. Once you've laid all of that out, it becomes much simpler to figure out the right words and the right way to talk to people. And I want to just touch on research a bit as well, which is one reason I'm really glad Jan is here. Research is really invaluable. It's important, certainly, to rely on your own knowledge and your own instincts. But you also want to avoid having tunnel vision, and often want to avoid listening to your family and friends because their opinions generally only go so far. You want to make sure that you are really understanding the people that you're developing and selling the product to. So different kinds of research can be absolutely invaluable. It's important for people that you're asking to partner with you. It's important for people that you're asking to invest with you. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the different kinds of research. There's quantitative, which is more about numbers, qualitative, which is more about sort of personal, getting a personal interaction and understanding of how people respond to your product. Primary, that you do yourself. Secondary, that you pull together from other sources. And one thing that I always like to point out is it's important to watch and observe and to listen to people who are going to be using your product. I always used to like to go into stores and, in a non-stalking kind of way, watch people as they made a buying decision. And you can sort of mentally see them going through, well, should I buy this or should I buy that? And you learn a lot from that. Now we have a much easier way to sort of watch and observe because we can do a lot of it online. And you can spend time on social media or in different kinds of group rooms, and you can understand how people are thinking about your product or about the need that your product is trying to fulfill and what the responses are. So important to constantly be gathering that personal information. Be really open to surprises. Most of the time when I go in to do research for a client, I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to hear or what I'm going to find. But every now and then I find the exact opposite of what I thought I was going to find. So you have to be open to the unexpected when you do research. You cannot make research fit your preconceived ideas and always deliver what you want to hear. You've got to let it tell you what is really true out there. I was going to mention that, you know, Jan a couple of weeks ago talked about information that's available. There's a lot that's in the public domain that you can spend some time gathering yourself. Jan is really great for providing direction and also providing a lot of syndicated data in slices that are available. And she's a really great resource for when you start to gather information in terms of your research. So all of these elements together allow you to then turn to that tip of the iceberg. When you've laid down the strategies and you start to look at, well, I want to be in this social media, or I want to be in this trade publication, or go to these kinds of trade shows. You know, what should I be doing? What should I be looking and sounding like? I encourage everyone to think about laying down the foundation and then turning to those executional matters as well. And I think we're all here to help you do both of those things. So as you think through it, feel free to reach out and, you know, kick around some ideas or talk about these elements further.